Okay, make sure you have your natural selection notes handout or companion and your journal with you. Your learning target today is I can explain how evolution occurs through the process of natural selection. So what I want you to do is I want you to think, write, and pair, and then share with your neighbor next to you. So number one, I want you to look at the picture of the 3 giraffe down below in the right-hand corner. Explain what you think is happening in the giraffe picture. Write down what you think natural selection is or what causes evolution to happen. And then share your idea with your partner. Jot down anything your partner might say to add. Don't spend more than a minute or 2 on this because these are some of the things we'll be learning. Some of the other questions or ideas that I want you to guide your learning throughout this presentation are what causes biodiversity on Earth? Think of the word bio, life, diversity meaning many or a variety. Do species change over time? If so, how? Those are some of the things I want you to be thinking about and being able to answer by the time you're done with this lecture. So here we go. All right. Natural selection. What is natural selection? Natural selection is the process by which populations change over time as those organisms with traits best suited for their environment survive and pass their genes or DNA on to the next generation. Organisms have inherited characteristics or traits that are inherited and controlled by those genes or again those small segments of DNA. Fitness. When we talk about fitness, no, I'm not talking about your physical fitness necessarily. I'm talking about the ability of an organism to survive and pass genes or DNA on to the next generation. The higher the level of fitness, more likely to survive and reproduce. Natural selection is often coined as survival of the fittest. This was coined by Darwin, which implies that fastest and strongest survive, which is completely false, versus natural selection being referred to as differential reproductive success. This idea explains that members of a population produce different amounts of offspring that are viably reproductive. Simply, survival equals reproduction, which equals the passing on of traits to other generations over time. The frequency of the alleles within a population or gene pool changes over time as well. So in a nutshell, natural selection is an organisms have better traits for their environment and survive and are able to reproduce more successfully than those that have less beneficial traits. Natural selection has 5 main components, or Darwin's 5 main points. Let's talk about those next. The first is variation. Individuals vary in a population. No 2 organisms are exactly alike due to sexual reproduction or meiosis and the process of gamete formation, unless you're an identical twin. So variation, each organism is unique because it receives different chromosomes from each parent. Number 2, environmental challenges. The survival of the individual is not random, but depends on heritable traits or trait variation. Variation among species is key to allow for organisms to increase their chance of survival in their environment, meaning the environment presents different challenges to the ability to survive and reproduce. And organisms have to be able to adapt or die. Number 3, some individuals leave more offspring than others, often known as the struggle for existence. So overproduction of offspring means organisms have more offspring than their environment can support. In this case, not all of the offspring survive. Number 4, there are a finite supply of environmental resources. Limited resource increased competition among organisms, which ultimately leads to those organisms best adapted to the available conditions to survive. So organisms of the same species will compete for food, shelter, territory, mating rights. And again, the organism that is best suited for that environment will be the one that most likely survives. Number 5, trait variation influences fitness variation, meaning different traits and variation would equal survival, and the same traits with no variation would equal death. Survival of the fittest. Organisms better suited for their environment are more likely to survive, reproduce, and pass on traits. So what that is saying is that if the organisms don't adapt and give variations in their traits, then there's going to be death because they're not changing. But if they have different traits and variation, then they're more likely to survive because they're more likely to be adapted to that environment. So pause the video. Think about the statement in number 1. The traits of the fittest individuals, those best suited to a particular environment, tend to increase in a population over time. The traits of the fittest individuals tend to increase in a population over time. So pause the video, think about that statement, and do a 1-minute quick write in your journal, and then answer number 2. Explain how the fittest is not always the strongest. Make sure to use your own words. So go ahead and pause the video and do that now. Alright, so on these next few slides we'll cover some other important vocab relating to evolution and natural selection. Make sure to write down the definition and 2 examples of each that are there on the slides. I'll also be talking throughout, so jot down any extra notes you feel in your journal that are important to you for your unit. Okay, adaptation and evolution occur over many generations, not within one individual organism. So changes in population include gene and allele frequency, which is the measure of how common an allele for a gene is in a population. So the greater the genetic variation within a population, the more likely the individuals survive environmental changes, creating adaptations over time. So natural selection leads to a change in the gene pool through genetic drift, which genetic drift is a change in the frequency of the occurrence of certain alleles or genes. So reproductive success also causes change in populations, which if an individual's reproductive rate is increased, its genes have a better chance of staying within the population's gene pool. And then selection advantage. Population diversity as a result of speciation, or the appearance of new species, can occur as a result of geographic isolation and genetic mutations. All 3 of these are ways that changes in populations occur and cause evolution to occur over time. All right, adaptations. Any inherited characteristic that increases an organism's chance of survival is an adaptation. Survival of an organism depends on its inherited favorable traits, which influence ability to compete for resources, attract mates, and avoid danger to itself and its offspring. So an adaptation is the alteration of a body structure, behavior, or function that makes an organism more successful in surviving to reproduce. Some examples of adaptations here are the milk snake has stripes that resemble the poisonous coral snake. Some lizards have tails that can break off in order to distract predators while they get away. The Venus flytrap has leaves that snap shut when touched in order to capture prey. remember, write down at least 2 of these examples. So I want you to take a look at some of these pictures here. What adaptations do you see? Just hold that thought, think about it. Common adaptations of terrestrial or land animals include resistance to disease, so individuals in certain parts of the world like sickle cell anemia and resistance to malaria. Running speeds of certain prey, changes will result to allele frequencies over time. A marine gastropod lack shells for protection but have the following adaptations: foul-tasting poisons and bright coloration. A European roe deer, delayed implantation of embryo from summer to late December, which increases offspring's chance of survival. You have 20,000 plus species of ants worldwide, which has contributed to their diversity around the world and their ability to adapt to their environment and have a variety of food sources. Mimicry, which is a harmless scarlet snake or scarlet king snake versus a venomous eastern coral, kind of like the milk snake that I showed you on the last slide. And then desert animals, keen senses of sight, smell, hearing, and ability to conserve water. Also dull coloration, which allows for them to blend in with their environment or have camouflage. Aerial animals, such as birds, have streamlined bodies for reduced air resistance, and forelimbs are modified into wings. Bones are hollow and spongy, and their eyes are very sharpened and well developed. So now looking back at that slide that I see, and after listening to some of those with your neighbor, please discuss how these and other adaptations can increase survival of organisms. Pause the video for a minute, jot down your answer that you and your partner came up with together in your journal. Again, don't spend more than a minute or 2 on this, but make sure that you understand how those adaptations can help increase. Give me one example in your journal that you jot down. All right, behavior. Behavior refers to the actions or reactions of an organism, usually in relation to the environment. So examples would be bears hibernating in the winter, migration of birds to a region with better climate, and squirrels hiding nuts for the winter. All right. Number one cause of evolution or change over time among populations is natural selection. Again, an individual organism cannot evolve in its lifetime, and natural selection does not act on individuals. It acts on populations. For example, a slow antelope cannot suddenly evolve speed. It has the traits it was born with. But over several generations, a population of antelope may have come to have more fast members and fewer slower members, as the fast antelope survive and the slower ones die before reproducing. So through natural selection, the population of antelope evolves into a group of faster organisms. Examples of populations changing like this would be the peppered moths in England during the Industrial Revolution. We'll study that in an online simulation next week. The Galapagos Islands, which is the finches and tortoises, which are what Darwin studied and what helped him to come up with his theory of evolution. And pesticide resistance in insects. So speciation is the development of a new species as a result of evolution by natural selection. Speciation may develop because of geographic barriers or distances. It may also occur because of different behaviors, for example, different mating rituals. Another reason for speciation to occur could be due to seasonal or timing differences. For example, some related species reach maturity in different seasons. If you look back at your phylogenetic trees and cladograms that we discussed last week, Each node represented a speciation point where a new species occurred and branched off from the common ancestor. All right, going back to what we talked about last week, phylogeny, which is the evolutionary history of a species, usually shown in the form of a branching diagram like a phylogenetic tree or a cladogram. Phylogenetic trees are diagrams that show how species may be related to each other through physical characteristics, genetics, or other traits. They're referred to as tree of life, shows how species evolved from a common ancestor. Branch lengths are proportional to the amount of time inferred evolutionary change. So the length of the line shows when something evolved. So a shorter line, shorter time evolved. Cladograms are a branching diagram or tree showing common ancestry. They do not typically indicate the amount of evolutionary time between groups or clades. A clade is a group of organisms that are displayed, and scientists use shared derived characters to define these groups. All right, the amazing and tremendous amount of biodiversity on Earth is due in part to the process called natural selection. And diversity is the variety and number of species in a biological community. So the ocean, variety of fish, turtles, sharks, plants, etc. Grasslands would be the variety of grasses, flowers, trees, and herbivores. So those are just a few examples. Now, if a species becomes extinct or dying off before it can adapt to changes in the environment, it will be gone forever and its genes removed from the population's gene pool. So extinction, of course, is the dying out of a species, like the mammoth, the dinosaurs, the dodo bird. When those die off, their gene pool also dies off and is removed from the population. All right, so let's summarize. The mechanisms that drive the process of evolution or genetic change over time are, number one, natural selection. Those organisms with favorable traits survive and reproduce. Number two, mutation. Any change in the sequence of DNA in a cell can be considered harmful, beneficial, or neutral, meaning they have no effect on the organism in which the mutation occurs. According to Darwin, an individual that is born with a beneficial mutation, that individual will more likely survive than others without. Number three, gene flow, the movement of alleles into and out of populations. It can either increase or decrease the genetic diversity of the population. Genes may be added to the gene pool, immigration, immigration, or genes may be removed when individuals leave the population, immigration, EMI. So leaving, exiting, immigration with an E. Added, immigration with an I, okay, coming in. All right. Number four, recombination or crossing over, the process by which genetic material from individuals becomes combined during sexual reproduction, also known as meiosis, resulting in enormous diversity in species. And genetic drift, which occurs in small populations, resulting in an allele being eliminated from the population entirely by chance. So those are the mechanisms that drive the process of evolution. All right, now what I want you to do is you're going to answer there's 8 questions. You have them at the back of your notes. Answer them both on your paper and in the Edpuzzle. Be sure to put the correct answer if you happen to miss a question on Edpuzzle. Make sure you mark the correct answer on your paper so you have it. Thanks for listening, and here's your questions. Practice 1. The guppy is a species of small freshwater fish. Scientists observed that the average size of guppies in a pond decreased over a few years after a guppy predator was introduced into the pond. What is the best explanation for the change in guppy size? A. Speciation. B. Convergent evolution. C. Inbreeding. Or D. Natural selection. The correct answer is D. Moving on. Practice number 2. How does the milkweed bug's coloration help it avoid being eaten by birds? Well, make sure milkweed plants have green leaves. Milkweed plants produce a milky sap containing compounds that taste bad to some animals. The milkweed bug is bright orange and red and feeds on the milkweed plant. The compounds in the milkweed sap accumulate in the milkweed bug but do not harm it. So, again, how does the milkweed bug's coloration help it avoid being eaten by birds? So, A, birds become confused by the bug's coloration, so the bug has time to escape. B, birds associate the bug's coloration with its bad taste and avoid eating it. C, birds are unable to locate the bug's head, so the bug can escape. Or D, birds cannot locate the bug because it appears to be part of the plant. And the answer is B. The birds have eaten it, and so they associate it with the bad taste. Practice 3. Which of these conclusions can be made based on the graphs shown? So make sure you're checking both the graphs. Look at the title first, then the X and the Y axis titles. Make sure you understand what it's measuring. So it's measuring body length of mosquitoes in a specific area. It says, which of these conclusions can be made based on the graph shown below? A, larger mosquitoes have migrated into the area. B, smaller mosquitoes are being eaten by larger mosquitoes. C, a mosquito length of 2 centimeters has become a disadvantage in this environment. Or D, mosquitoes with a body length of 3 centimeters have the longest lifespan. So if you're looking, you look at the first graph is from 1990, the next graph is from 2000. So in a span of 10 years, look at the differences in the graph and see, remember the number of individuals increases as you go up the graph. The answer is C. The Myoxoma virus was used to control an overpopulation of European rabbits in Australia. When first introduced in the mid-1900s, the virus greatly reduced the European rabbit population. Today, the virus is not an effective control of the European rabbit population. Fewer European rabbits are affected by the virus today because they have A, learned to avoid the virus, B, moved away from infected areas, C, undergone a change in diet, or D, developed a resistance to the virus. The answer is D. Practice 5. A man treated his home with pesticide that kills roaches. The first application of the pesticide killed 92% of the roaches. 2 months later, he applied the pesticide to his home again, but the second application killed only 65% of the roaches. What would best explain the decrease in the effectiveness of the pesticide? A, the pesticide is effective only against mature roaches. B, once roaches learned how to fight the pesticide, they taught others. C, the surviving roaches were naturally resistant to the pesticide, and that resistance was inherited by their offspring. Or D, the pesticide caused some of the roaches' digestive systems to mutate and metabolize the pesticide. The answer is C. diagram shows relationships of selected species over time. According to this information, which of these species is expected to have the greatest phenotypic difference from the ancestral species? Remember, the ancestral species is species P. So, looking at those, which one would have the greatest phenotypic, so physical outward appearance, from the ancestral species? Look at how many nodes you have as well. The answer is D, species U. If you look, there's only one node here, so the differences aren't very much. But here we have 1, 2, 3, and it's up the furthest. Characteristics of some lizards: live live mainly in hot, dry climates, release very little water, excrete waste in the form of solid uric acid, which contains very little water. So which of the following is the best supported by the information shown above? A, these lizards evolved in arid habitats. B, modern lizards drink more water than their ancestors did. C, these lizards cool themselves by evaporation. D, modern lizards excrete more water than their ancestors did. Answer is A. And last question. Question 8. About 10,000 years ago, two populations of tassel-eared squirrels were separated from each other. Today, these squirrels are so different that they are unable to interbreed when brought together. Which of the following explains this phenomenon? Hint: what do these words mean? Competition, extinction, predation, or speciation? This question would be a good one to refer to when you're doing your project tomorrow in class on Squirrel Island. The answer is D. All right. Now that you're done with your lecture, please make sure to grab your show your notes to the sub, grab your natural selection story worksheet. Your task: write a story that describes the process of natural selection. 1. Color the pictures, cut out the pictures, arrange them in the correct order, and glue in your notebook on pages 42 to 43. Write a short description, story, or caption about each picture explaining what is happening. Include all of the following words in your story. Pre-AP, you must include all words. Regular, include 5 words. Modified, include 3 words. That is due on Friday. Make sure to turn it into the sub. Actually, glue it into your journal on page 42 and 43, and I will grade it on Monday. Have a good night.